Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's kind of interesting to me as Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney were reading some texts today. Kind of interesting why the Lauren Boeberts and the Marjorie Trader Greens and that ilk are so hell-bent on us not seeing what they were doing with their phones on January 6th. We're now finding out. In fact, some really interesting texts came out today. Well, a couple from Donald Jr. Dumb Jr. was actually almost the voice of reason on January 6th, was actually the most astute political advisor, and I can't actually believe I said that. But here to share some thoughts on, have I just lost my mind? Did I wake up on the wrong side of reality? I've got Fred Wellman here to talk with us. He's a political consultant and senior advisor to the folks over at the Lincoln Project. Fred, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here, Rick. Thanks a lot.
So I'm looking at the texts today, and I guess I've always thought of Junior as kind of a dope, not too bright, whatever. This was actually fairly good advice.
Well, that's true, but I'm not going to lie. I find great entertainment the fact that he had to text the chief of staff at the White House to get hold of his dad. I mean, it's just, what does that say right there? Maybe he had good advice, but he couldn't get it to his own father. He had to go to the chief of staff and beg the chief of staff. And that's the thing. I mean, and what I think we talked about a little bit, it's really telling to see the conversations that are occurring that day. And as somebody pointed out that I stole, of course, because I always do that, this is the unprivileged stuff. Can you imagine what's in the privileged? What's he hiding? I mean, this is stuff he wasn't hiding. I can only imagine what he hid or is trying to hide. Right. And that's probably the conversations begging Trump to do something, who refused to do so. I think today was a very powerful day. I think the committee did a genius job of reading them out loud. I personally am just absolutely chomping at the bit, waiting for public hearings so we can see this live in real time.
Yeah, before we go into any further stuff, do you think it's going to matter? Do you really honestly and truthfully think at this moment it's going to matter? Because I'll tell you, I think we're so in our camps that I don't know that there are any 3s or 4s left. I think everyone's a 5 at this moment.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, we are in our separate corners. We've all picked our sides. It's very hard to break through our separate media ecospheres. We don't bridge that gap very well. I'm actually working on a new project right now that I'm very excited about. I can't announce yet that's going to research a little bit of that. It's like, how do we break through each other? But you're right. But in the end, for me, Rick, is I kind of given up the idea that I'm going to convince a lot of these folks. What I do want is justice. I was a soldier for 22 years. What we saw was an attack in our capital. Almost 150 police officers went to the hospital. To me, I just want justice at this point. Maybe that's all it's going to take. Maybe somebody finally goes to jail. We'll finally see some justice. But actually reaching the other side, I don't see it happening.
Because most of the people who I know are still Trump supporters, and most of the ones who are Trump supporters are still. They have a different narrative. They look at the January 6th not as how I look at it, as an attempt to overthrow our democracy and stop the certification of an election that had no reason to be stopped. But they still look at it through this alternative rationale lens that I don't know that we're ever going to be able to reach them. And I think that's dangerous because, look, 10 years down the road, I still think this is with us.
Yeah, that's the terrifying part. And look at the history. And it's God wins the law. You're not supposed to bring up the Nazis. I got that. Well, let's look a historic example of a time where a democracy fell to an autocratic movement. April 8th, 9th, 1923, beer hall putsch, Munich, Germany. Hitler uses his right-wing General Ludendorff as his symbolic head of his movement. They stormed a beer hall in Munich where the Bavarian president was speaking, trying to convince him to lead a march to Berlin to take over the country. It fails when the police say, nah, and the soldiers say no. 16 Nazis die, about 6 police die. Hitler goes to jail. Hopefully that's the end of the story, right? But it wasn't, was it? That failed coup ended up teaching Hitler that he wasn't going to win the government through violence. He decided to go through the democratic levers of power. And he said something key that date, 10 years. 10 years later, Hitler is the chancellor of Germany through essentially a democratic process that he had manipulated, minority vote, and takes over, eventually taking over the entire country. So for me, I look a lot at the historic analogy of where we are, that a lot of folks were calling January 6th, our Reichstag fire, but I completely disagree. January 6th was our beer hall push. And the autocratic movement we're facing is learning the lessons I think that they learned, which is, okay, so let's not do that. Let's take over election boards across the country. Let's pass 250 laws rolling back voting rights. Let's pass really creepy laws that mean that a legislator could basically overturn an election they deem as not right. I mean, that's what scares me the most, Rick, is I don't necessarily think we're going to have another maybe attempt on the Capitol, but I do believe we're going to have a worse movement, which is one that takes over our country through ostensibly our process.
Right. Now, this is where I just had a conversation with David Pepper, former head of the Ohio Democratic Party, and talking
Smart
about
guy.
Trying to do something about making sure that we're going to be able to vote in 2022 and beyond. And I can't say that that's assured based on what I'm seeing going on in some of these Republican-led states, and that's frightening to me.
Yeah, it is terrifying, and even states that aren't necessarily Republican. I mean, look at Georgia, and look at the way they're doing it. And what's really scary is they're pushing the local election boards, they're pushing out the local school boards, they're pushing these movements at the local level where a lot of these decisions are made. Remember, there is no national elections. There's elections managed across the country by different states and different local boards. So I think they're very aware, and I do believe, and I'm a critic of our Democratic Party. I am a Democrat for the last 6 years or so, and my frustration is there just seems to be an obtuseness and a lack of action to recognize the danger that democracy is in. I did catch you talking to David about the idea we can out-organize this kind of suppression. The problem is it's not. I think we've gone beyond that. That you can almost make that argument 5 years ago or 4 years ago, even 2 years ago. But now they've passed so many laws that you can out-organize, maybe even get the votes and say, well, sorry, look, that he dotted his I instead of crossing his T, so we're going to throw those 50,000 votes out. They've made these laws where they could literally just totally take over an election board, and even if we did out-organize them, they could still toss our votes out. It's terrifying. Yeah. I mean, I wish somebody called me a doomer today. Like, well, yeah, I have a little doom and gloom. I admit that. I'm also fighting.
No, I'm a realist. I live in the real world, and I see what's going on. Right. And I've read the quote unquote confidential memos that the people like Jenna Ellis think are confidential because she wrote it across the top of the page. I'm looking at this stuff where there was a very well thought out plan on how they were going to overturn an election, the votes of we the people, and thought that we would swallow it. That's the amazing thing, that there were so many of them. Look, you could have one crank who comes up with this idea, but the fact that it permeated a number of places in that administration and a lot of people were briefed on it, that's scary.
And they're still keeping it secret. The funny thing about conspiracies is they usually come out. They're doing a pretty good job, and they're doing it right in front of us. I mean, I saw a great article today. Someone like, don't be fooled. They're not doing this in secret. They're not trying to take over our country in secret. They're doing it right in our face. Bannon's being very obvious. He's more than happy to tell us exactly what he's doing. And unfortunately, I believe some of the people who we trust to be in power have a certain, I call it norms and traditions, right? They're all about norms and traditions. I remember a lot of people saying after the election they want to get back to normal. One of the things I say quite often, and I say it pretty crass, and I won't say it on radio because it's not nice, but norms and traditions went out the freaking window when that orange guy came down the escalator. And if you think we're going to get back to norms and traditions, we're wrong. It's a pendulum, and the pendulum needs to swing back. A friend of mine is a sociologist here in St. Louis, and he teaches at one of the universities. He says, this is a sociological thing. And there's an experiment where they push the line of how far the line can go. And when you push the line of what's a norm and what's a tradition and what's a system, the new line becomes the line. And since we have not since we discovered the Hatch Act is completely useless, we discovered that most of the government ethics regulations hinge on the president being mad about it, and he doesn't, right? And so if we don't snap those back, we don't tighten those ethics laws, if we don't tighten the voting laws, then we have allowed a new norm to be set. And the next Trump won't be so stupid, and he'll be much greedier.
No, that's what I've been saying for a while. The reality is Trump was if someone whispered in his ear, it shot out his mouth. I don't think he had that filter. I'm concerned about somebody like DeSantis who's a little bit smarter, someone like Josh Hawley who's a little bit smarter, people who are true, in my words, fascists and true authoritarians who understand why and how to use the system, where Trump really didn't. He was just the bull in the china shop.
I live in Missouri now. The Attorney General here Eric Schmidt is running for Senate against Eric Greitens, of all people. The leading Republican candidate is an accused sexual assaulter and stealing, ethics regulations breaker already. But so Eric Schmidt's decided the best way he can run is to be outrageously more Trumpy and more right-wing than anybody. So the attorney general here is suing school districts over their mask mandates. He's suing private businesses for wanting to have vaccine mandates. He's literally spent the last year and a half using taxpayer money and using his office to perpetuate his bona fides as a right-wing nut job. And meanwhile, crimes aren't being prosecuted, crimes aren't being addressed. But he's running around the state suing his own citizens. He actually put out a memo this week because he's misinterpreting the law, but he's convincing school districts that they can't even tell kids to wear masks. In my girlfriend's school, kids are getting in fights at school because parents are sending their kids to school saying that their kids shouldn't wear masks. Kids are walking out of class, being forced into class. Kids are getting in fights over it because it's disturbing the class. He's literally creating vigilantism in high schools. A bus driver, a police officer got on a school bus and told the bus driver she couldn't tell the kids to wear masks and threatened her. And by the way, it was a police officer from a different district. That's going on because the Attorney General of Missouri, in his brain, has decided that's a great way to perpetuate his campaign. That is the next trouble, the Republican and Trumpist I'm scared of. That's evil and maniacal in its scope, that he'd allow kids in high school to fight each other to help him.
No, but that's predictable. I mean, all of this stuff is
right.
is in the playbook. We need the new brown shirts. We need to brainwash the kids into believing that they're victims, and nobody plays the victim card like Republicans.
Right.
You could disagree with that, but I'm watching Dr. Oz today go off about how the Philly Inquirer is going to call him by his actual
canceled.
name, and somehow he's now a victim.
Did you see the Pittsburgh? I'm here in Pittsburgh. Not just here because I like beer and sandwiches. Jesus, man. But having said, yeah, exactly. And no, look, I'm an Iraq veteran. Okay, I was there for OIF-1. I spent a lot of times in Iraq. My first tour, I was doing civil affairs in northern Iraq, building schools and sitting with my Iraqi partners. And you know how Saddam ruled Iraq was he pitted everyone against each other. The reason a Sunni minority was able to rule Iraq for 35, 40 years because he had the Shia, he had the Sunni, he had the Kurds all fighting each other. They're so busy hating each other. Nobody had time to hate him and overthrow him. And that's the maniacal brilliance of it. That's let's be honest, where genocide came from was, we have somebody to hate. Obviously, it's the Jews' fault. Yeah. And here we are in America. It's these these vaccine Nazis who are fascists. I mean, the idea that they're calling this administration fascist, they don't want us to die of a preventable illness. That's scary. And to me, to see high school students coming home frazzled from their day at school, not because it was hard or because school was tough, because the Attorney General of the state is encouraging vigilantism over masks, a piece of freaking cloth. And I tell you, I've seen this story. I had to fight through the desert to end that story. It tears me to death. It just tears me up to know that I might have to fight through my own country.
Yeah, no, I mean we're in an interesting moment. They say, "May you live in interesting times." These are those. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Fred Wellman. Fred is a political consultant and also senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. So how do we move this back? I mean, the Lincoln Project started by former Republicans who saw what the former guy was doing. I thought there would be more of those kind of Republicans who would want to move away from, because look, I have respect for honest, true conservatives, people who want to save institutions, and the kind of people who aren't just flag waving, kind of look at me, but actually care about institution and the future of this country. I used to believe there was more of them. I guess I'm wrong.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And why are there so few of us who have turned on this? Why are there so few, if you will, the Reagan Republicans? I grew up I was a defense hawk. I was a soldier for my entire adult life. I believed in strong defense. I believed in coalitions. I was not terribly socially conservative, but I fit into that party. And then one day I woke up and I didn't fit in the party anymore. They had moved away from me. So you're right. I did expect more. I mean, it's nice to see the people we've had. It's nice to have allies like Bill Kristol or, the Republicans, for accountability, the Republican Accountability Project. We do have our allies, but just simply not enough. Too many have decided that power is more important. And the scarier part is, if you saw that article about Peter Mayer, the congressman, where he talked about how one of his colleagues literally told him on the floor during the impeachment vote, he simply could not vote for it for fear for his life, for fear for his family. that they're actually afraid of this. It's was it the leopard that eats your face, right? They're actually afraid of their own constituents that will turn on them, and not just run their political careers, but their entire lives.
Yeah.
And so,
and that's why they're taking pictures with guns around Christmas trees.
That's right. It's just extremists. The extremists are ruining the day. And look, I'd be lying if we said that this just popped up because of Trump. This is the inevitable conclusion. My colleague at Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens, Stuart wrote a book called "It Was All a Lie," and it's sort of the realization that this has been building for 2 decades, 3 decades. This is the inevitable conclusion of a conservative movement that was becoming more and more extreme, and then Donald Trump sort of brought that out. So it'd be reckless of us to say it's new.
I remember '92 and the speeches Pat Buchanan was giving back then. He was radical in '92. Today he'd be a Democrat.
Yeah, just about, but you saw it. I mean, the thing that scared me, that the politicization of our military, the failure of our political media to understand the moment they're in. I tweeted today. It's like, it's not like, it isn't that this isn't a partisan issue. Now it's democracy versus anti-democracy. It's autocracy versus democracy. It's only partisan because one party has given themselves over to an autocratic movement. Yeah. I'd love to go back to argue about tax policy. That'd be the best day ever, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I would love that. I wish we could have that, but we can't. But here's my problem. My problem is it's being framed right, left. It's being framed Democrat, Republican. It's being framed in all these ways. When the reality is it's the extraordinarily wealthy against the rest of us, because who's funding all of this stuff? For me, that's the central question in all of this. Who's funding it?
Shocking. Peter Thiel, the Koch brothers. I mean, it's all right there in front of you. You'd be a fool not to see it. Hell, Mr. Man at the time, Man of the Year, is moving his country from California to Texas, right? I mean, I think it is right in your face all the time. And those powerful interests are able to spend ridiculous amounts of money. I was very disappointed to see Bernie Marcus gave $1 million to a PAC supporting Eric Greitens. My God, Eric Greitens is a monster. I know Eric Greitens. I've known Eric Greitens for over a decade. He's a monster. And this man gave him $1 million. How can you keep up with that? How do you and I, as average Americans, donating the maximum amount to a campaign of whatever we can afford, $50, possibly fight those kind of interests? And that's where the Lincoln Project came in. I think a lot of the reason we succeeded is we had a voice. We understood how to communicate to the audience. We had one moment. We had one thing we wanted to do: to convince 3 to 4% of Republicans that voted for Trump to not vote this time.
You guys did a great job.
I'd like to say we were part of a coalition.
It was great. I'd love to have you talk about that at another point. But Fred, I got to take a quick break right here. I appreciate the time. Please come back.
I look forward to it.
Good stuff. Fred Wellman, political consultant, senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.